This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Permix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. And welcome into episode number 113 here on the Huskies Warming House Podcast. Noah Grant alongside Nick Maxon here recording on this Monday night, May 30th, as we are just in the middle, or just at the start, I should say, of period number 3 for the Carolina Hurricanes and the New York Rangers. Unfortunately, through 2 periods of play, Nick, only one team has shown up so far. So either we're going to be talking about what we think we're going to be talking about, which is the Rangers having a date with the 2-time Stanley Cup back-to-back champs in Tampa Bay, or we're talking about one of the wildest comebacks in Game 7 history. I know what my money's on, but other than that, Nick, it's a pleasure to have you in here as always. We'll talk all things related to the second round and start of round number 3 in our extra ice session today. We do have some women's hockey news to touch on. Their schedule did get released for next season, and they do have a couple of transfers coming in. And then the middle of the show is kind of not a fun topic to be talking about. The CHL Hockey Canada World Junior lawsuit from the 2018 Canadian World Junior team. We'll touch on that and everything coming out of that as well. But we start, as always, with Center Ice View news and notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View news and notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup here, Noah, and thanks for bearing with me again with my sort of tent setup, if you could call it. Just getting in from South Florida this evening. Lucky to actually get the chance to be here with you tonight. Lots going on, right? Lots going on in the NHL, even though it is the end of May here on Memorial Day. How about this? John Tortorella, I don't know if you want to call it the prize coach anymore, but definitely seems to be definitely has NHL experience having an interview with the Philadelphia Flyers, although no decision has come from the organization yet on a head coaching decision. I'd imagine more interviews are to follow, and I would imagine most teams in this situation, Noah, will wait till the end of the season just in case any sort of assistance on some of these maybe Stanley Cup winning teams or long playoff teams become available also for an interview. Let's keep things in the front office, though, because there's also some movement in those areas. How about the Vancouver Canucks? This one I do like. Henrik and Daniel Sedin moving on from as special advisors to the general manager and now into new roles in player development within the organization. Then also kind of coming back in to fill those spots, former NHLers Mike Komisarek and Michael Samuelson. So a couple of familiar names there. Mike Komisarek, familiar with the Toronto Maple Leafs, also as well, to fill up some of that more developmental staff. Speaking of Toronto, since I did mention Mike Komisarek, who spent a few seasons on the blue line there for the Maple Leafs, Jason Spezza finally retiring from the game of hockey. He's played his last NHL game, but not last game for hockey. He's going to be joining the Toronto front office. And this makes sense here, Noah. A guy with that much of experience, 38 years of age, 995 career points, 1,248 games played in the National Hockey League between Ottawa, Dallas, and Toronto. 25 points in 71 games this season, only 1 point in 5 postseason appearances for the Maple Leafs this season. But again, Noah, this is a great guy. A big reason why Toronto went out and got him was his on and off ice leadership. I can't speak today. Apparently it must be the salt water. Something like that. But really, really good move here for both the Maple Leafs and for Jason Spezza. I imagine he's going to be quite the gem to have in a front office role.
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing that bites for him is, 5 points away from silver stick or whatever it would be for 1,000 games. A silver stick, I guess, is for 1,000 games played, but
yes,
1,000 points, it would be kind of cool to be a part of that club. But a lot of good front office moves. I kind of wonder if you're working as a Vancouver Canuck, executive front office, player development, whatever you want to call it. The real question is, how do you tell Henrik and Daniel apart? That's a difficult task, I think, when you go to work every day. They're both equally as talented on and off the ice with their roles within the team. So kind of an interesting little concept. But yeah, Toronto, Jason Spezza, a really exciting move for the Leafs. Actually, within our Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, probably not the best move that the Maple Leafs have made so far in this offseason, though. Their next one, another 38-year-old that got locked up. Pretty impressive moves here with the Maple Leafs so far.
Yeah, so far. And as we mentioned before, again, another first-round exit, but this one felt different, right? And after the news that Kyle Dubas as well as Sheldon Keefe would be returning, it seems like, again, more of the same in terms of keeping that player group together again, inking Mark Giordano to a 2-year extension worth $800,000 annual. So again, the cap crunching Toronto Maple Leafs are able to continue to make it work. But, interestingly enough, if you actually took his market value, supposedly he's worth around $6.3 million a year. So I don't know if that's a hometown discount because Giordano's definitely not from Toronto, I believe. But it does speak volumes, though, Noah, that when you feel good in a system, you feel good about a team's chances to contend again. This is definitely an older player, definitely over the hump a little bit, but still can contribute on the ice that I think is willing and is obviously putting a gamble on the Maple Leafs to try to win his first ever Stanley Cup with Mark Giordano.
Yeah, a really good pickup for Toronto. And like you talked about, having those defensive numbers. I think it was, I forget how to say his name. I always say Dom Lazukian, but that's not how you say his name. He works for The Athletic and does a fantastic job with those market value analytics. And 6.3 million was his projected value. So to get him at $800K, I would say, as you mentioned, a little bit of a hometown discount for the Maple Leafs, who drastically need that and need somebody on the back end with the injuries they had this year, but also next year, just having that veteran experience and someone that they can rely on through his age 40 season. International news, the United States at the Worlds dropping a late lead to the Czechs, who captured bronze at the Worlds. Canada scoring twice with the goalie pulled to force overtime in the gold medal game against Finland, but it was Sakari Manninen with the golden goal for the Finns, who get their second victory on the world stage, on the international stage, in as many years. They're, of course, the reigning Olympic champions as well, too. So interestingly, Canada up 1-0 to start period number 3, and then they gave up 3 straight goals before mounting that comeback. 2 goals with the goaltender pulled. 4-3 was the final score in that one. So international news. Speaking of that Canadian team, there's a couple of things that we're going to get to, like we mentioned in the main portion of the show, that involve potentially, anyway, some of the players that might have been on that roster. So moving over to some women's hockey news closer to the North American side, the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association, or PWHPA, has reportedly entered a formal agreement with Billie Jean King Enterprises and the Mark Walter Group to explore the formation of a financially stable elite league, according to The Athletic. So this reportedly will include 6 teams with 23-player rosters, 3 coaches on each team, a minimum salary of $35,000, and a league average salary of $55,000, according to Sportsnet's Jeff Merrick. Nick, we've talked about this round and round with women's hockey about, them being able to have a league that is sustainable. You kind of get a glimpse of what the details might be as far as player salaries. I believe the average player salary is probably close to just under $30,000 now. I think for most players is like $22,000 to $30,000. So a little bit of a pay bump for these players. We talked about it though, Nick, with only 6 teams, $55,000 is not I don't want to say it's not a livable salary, but it's a salary that is not befitting of a professional athlete in a lot of senses, and may cause a lot of players to still have to work on the side with some of these things. Do you think this is a step in the right direction? Do you think there's more that needs to be ironed out as far as some of these, things trying to make sure that you have sustainability and the desire for some of these players to play? Or, is there still more left to be desired here?
There's a lot left to be desired, Noah. We talked about it, right? So these are what I would call a wish list, essentially, right? They want the rosters to have this much salary, whether it's coaches and players. But again, the part that we don't see it is how are they going to execute this? So is there going to be, with this, Mark Walter group, again, the financial stable part is how do you do that? You need advertisers, you need corporate sponsors, you need groups in to be able to commit to multi-year agreements so that way you have that sustainability. One, and number two, right? You can't just have it, sustainable for, just those numbers. You have to have opportunity for growth. You have to have opportunity for expansion. So this is just the very, very basics. There's really not much to this, at least from my sport. There's a lot that has to be divulged, and a lot of the details are still yet to be ironed out, as you mentioned. So this is great that they want something that's more concrete, but as far as executing that, still a lot left that needs to be talked about.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that just the growth of the game, you'd like to see them push for sure a six-figure salary if possible, but, continue to try to bump that up to make it sustainable. When you're talking about minimum salaries and a league average salary for a lot of these players, we're getting to a better place, but it's been a slow and tumultuous ride, and we're just not quite there yet. And with the rise of a lot of other sports, I know that obviously soccer worldwide, or football as one would like to call it, has a little bit more growth globally, but nonetheless, they've talked about, even with the U.S. women's team and their challenges with their salaries as well too. There's a lot of growth on the women's side for not only hockey, but a lot of sports that we still need to continue to develop and really find a sustainable future for. Speaking of sustainable futures, our final topics, injury news around the National Hockey League. Let's start in Washington. Tom Wilson did undergo knee surgery. He's going to miss 6 to 8 months. Boston's Brad Marchand will miss half a year after surgery on both of his hips this past week. And Calgary's Chris Tanev, an absolute warrior for the Flames, underwent surgery for a dislocated shoulder and torn labrum. He's going to be out 4 to 6 months as well. Seth Jarvis leaving Game 7 for Carolina with an upper body injury, as did netminder Antti Ranta in period number 2. And welcome into the main portion of the show, episode number 113 here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. Noah Grant alongside Nick Maxon. Nick, it's a pleasure to have you here on this Monday, May 30th in the evening. Show coming out Tuesday morning. Nick, you're just getting off of a plane, so we're happy to have you here. What were you up to?
Happy to be on the ground.
Yeah. What were you up to? And the question was it a lot warmer than it has been here?
Good question. I didn't really pay attention. So, which I think is what you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah, so. Sandy beaches tend to do that to you.
Yeah, was in South Florida for a week. Was also doing some interviews via telephone as well as some in-person interviews as well. So a lot of pleasure, you call it. So a lot of just relaxing. It was kind of a post-graduation gift to myself, able to kind of just go back to a place that, I can really disconnect from the outside world, but also get some valuable insight too. A lot of the conversations I had this week are pointing me in a much more firm direction of where I need to go to get to my ultimate dream of television play-by-play. So I've been very, very happy with the conversations I've had, but for the most part, it's been a lot of sandy beaches, a lot of warmth. It was in the low 90s. I didn't have a single bad day at all. If it rained, it was late at night or early in the morning. So it was great. Unfortunately, today was probably actually the worst weather day, and darn near actually canceled flight for those in the Minnesota region, whether essentially anywhere around the state. We're just being hammered by storms, and for our plane that was scheduled to come in this afternoon, basically the pilot was either we have to cancel this thing or we can kind of zoom our way and beat the storms. And well, we beat the storms barely, and let's just say it was a bumpy ride in. So I'm happy to be 2 feet on the earth right now, and away from the kind of the windy skies that were out there at 35,000 feet.
Yeah, certainly. Kind of an interesting journey here, of course, for the Huskies Warming House podcast as well. We should have a normal Sunday release coming up this week, as far as I know. It's the week after that's going to get a little hairy with my particular work schedule, as I work that entire weekend and then some. So we'll definitely keep you posted on that. But why am I telling you this? Well, I just started my first shifts, the night shift in the hospital this past week, and I have seen. I don't want to say a lot more than I bargained for, but I've seen a lot. That's for darn sure. And a lot of sights and smells and yelling and stuff hospitals. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride. Got to see my first code blue, which is both equally exciting and not exciting, knowing what a code blue is, but the patient did survive, so that's important. So a lot of interesting things that I've been able to witness, as far, none of which involved hockey, but we can definitely jump on over to that and some exciting things for the women's hockey program, adding a couple of players and getting their schedule announced. So let's start with that and our two transfers that are joining the women's hockey program. Our first, a junior forward from Fargo, North Dakota, Avery Myers, who played for Fargo South and the Minnesota Ice Cougars, spent her first 2 seasons at New Hampshire, 10 total points in limited ice time. As a freshman, a team high 23.5 shooting percentage, which equals 4 goals on 17 shots. And as a sophomore, an equal tally, 4 goals on 28 shots this past season. Ironically enough, St. Cloud State will actually play New Hampshire on January 6th in a holiday tournament, so she'll get to see her former team in that matchup. On the other side, another junior joins the fold. This one very exciting, kind of staying within conference a little bit. JoJo Viola Chobak from Chicago, Illinois, from the Chicago Young Americans, spent the past 2 seasons with the Duluth Bulldogs as a netminder there, appearing in 20 games last season, 14 starts last year behind Emma Soderberg, and was really the primary goalie when Soderberg left for the Beijing Olympics this past spring. In those games, Chobak was 10-4-1 with 3 shutouts and 348 total saves, named WCHA Goalie of the Month in January after a .934 save percentage that saw a great performance against Ohio State, and played over 906 minutes with a 1.79 goals against average. So a great addition, along with Sonia Ahola in net and Carly Reese, should she decide to return in a Husky sweater as well. So Nick, 2 players, you kind of have a depth forward here and a goaltender that really could compete for a starting position as a transfer coming in. What do you think of these 2 new additions for the women's hockey program?
At least for the numbers that we see, Noah, right? I really do like the Chobak addition. As you mentioned before, we've mentioned it for the men's side, right? You always want 2 goaltenders that are trying to push each other for that primary spot, right? You always want that internal competition, makes them better, makes the team better. So I really like that move. As far as Avery Myers goes, as you mentioned, kind of a depth forward, at least from what we see. Only 17 shots in a season. That's been kind of the primary concern with St. Cloud State women's hockey as of late. Just not enough pucks going to the net. So hopefully maybe in a more expanded role, maybe she has a similar role that maybe we get some more offensive production, at least some more chances towards the net. Can't wait to see what this new coach does. It is nice to see, though, that there's some recruiting, whether it's transfers or whatever, that this new coach apparently is attracting some players over to the program. So great to see, and I can't wait to see them suit up in a Husky sweater.
Yeah, I concur. You kind of never really know what you have till you have it. And like we talked about, a new environment, you talked about Avery Myers and her low shot attempts, but she's able to put the puck in the net when she does have opportunities. So that's exciting. And you never know, around some good players, hopefully, better players, I would assume, in the WCHA than, maybe where New Hampshire's coming from. You never know. Obviously, good players are good players regardless, but maybe being surrounded by some new players and new fresh faces might do her well, and continuing to, improve that production and put that to good use with some more shot volumes, in addition to someone who looks like she can finish into the back of the net there, and then someone who doesn't want any pucks going into the back of the net in Viola Chobak. I'm excited for her and to see if she can push Sonia Ahola for that starting spot, or maybe you get a 1A, 1B goalie rotation, similar to the conversation we talked about on the men's side. Should Brett Larson maybe have rotated goaltenders a little bit more? Well, now we're going to get our answer next year to see which goalie comes out of camp and either takes the starting spot, or if there's not a definitive number 1 goaltender on either side. So the schedule for the women's hockey program, they do open their season on September 25th, September 30th, and October 1st. An exhibition game on that 25th versus Manitoba, and a series that September 30th and October 1st against RPI. Those all will be at home. Ohio State, Wisconsin, Minnesota twice, St. Thomas twice, Bemidji State, and Duluth are the conference games that cap off the first half of the season, plus a non-conference series in November against Lindenwood as per usual. Holiday tournament, January 6th and 7th, they face New Hampshire and Merrimack at a neutral site, and then Mankato will be visited twice, or played in two separate series. This is 4 games, I should say. Ohio State, Bemidji State, Wisconsin, and Duluth in the second half. Minnesota State will be the last series before the WCHA quarterfinals get underway. So the women's hockey team, looking forward to them, looking forward to their schedule as they move forward into their new season, and some new faces. Specifically, really curious to see, without Emma Paluzny, what the goaltending situation is really going to take hold of. I know Sonia Hola had some really good numbers, I think, heading into this season, but we're going to have to see if this is her time to shine, or if you have another goaltender that will challenge her for that position. Nick, moving on to our next topic here, and kind of our last topic here for the main portion of the show. This is a more challenging topic for our listeners and our viewers, so we do want to mention viewer and listener discretion is advised. The following story does contain depictions and graphic depictions of sexual violence and sexual assault, so we do want to put that disclaimer out there as we move forward into this story. With that being said, we do have a story that was broken a couple days ago by Rick Westhead, once again, of TSN. Kind of in similar timing to what we saw last year, where the Kyle Beach story started to break in May as well too. And Nick, this has significance not only for the fact that some of these players that were on this particular team that we're about to mention did just get done playing in the World Championships, but also because the World Junior Championships that were postponed from this winter are getting ready to start in the not too distant future here in the summer. So a lot of things that are up in the air, but allegedly from the 2018 Canadian World Junior team, there were allegations in an 18-page statement identifying John Does 1 through 8 from the Canadian U20 men's junior hockey team. The allegations were as follows. And I do have the article pulled up on TSN. For those who are wondering, if you search Rick Westhead and TSN. So according to this lawsuit, 8 players, and it was interesting because the release from TSN said 8 players either part of the team or within the CHL, and then the NHL, the next statement the following day, released that it said all 8 players were a part of this team. So we don't particularly know for sure, but it sounds like they might all 8 have been a part of this team. I know a lot of people have gone back to the 2018 gold medal winning World Junior Canadian team and have looked through that roster. From what it seems like is that the college players were not involved. I think there were 3 college players, one of those being Cale McCarr. But other than that, we don't have any definitive answers, and we're not here to play the guessing game. But I know a lot of people definitely have gone and looked through that roster, and there's some big name NHLers in here. So according to the lawsuit, the alleged assaults took place in the early morning of June 19th, 2018, during a 2-day Hockey Canada event in London. And the lawsuit coming from a female defendant said the John Does 1 through 8 attended that Hockey Canada Foundation Gala June 18th, and following the event went to a bar and restaurant in downtown London. The claim said that the plaintiff arrived at the bar at 11 p.m. where she met a hockey player not listed as a defendant who introduced her to John Doe 1 and his teammates. The defendant players allegedly bought the woman a number of alcoholic beverages and shots, and she became separated from her friends, growing more intoxicated as the night progressed. The plaintiff said that she showed evident signs of intoxication, including glassy eyes, slurred speech, stumbling, and loss of balance as she left the bar with one of the players, John Doe 1, and went with him to Delta London Armories Hotel. After she engaged in sexual acts with him, John Doe 1 invited the remainder of John Does 2 through 7 into the room without the knowledge or consent of the plaintiff. According to the lawsuit, the players directed her to fondle her genitals and perform oral sex on them. The players also allegedly straddled the plaintiff while placing their genitals in her face, slapped the plaintiff on her buttocks, spat on her, ejaculated in and on her, engaged in vaginal intercourse with her, pressured her from leaving the room when she tried to, and engaged in other sexual activities with her. So, Nick, I believe the settlement, if I remember correctly, had a non-disclosure agreement, but it was north of, I think 3.5 million is what one of the reports had said. All this being said, my mind was aghast, mind blown at this information and how hockey players or otherwise, this takes a back seat to how eight people can do this to somebody else in life. Definitely was an eye opener for us, Nick. But your first reaction when you first heard the story, I don't know, were you still down in Florida when you first heard the information, and kind of what were your first initial thoughts as you kind of have tried to piece this story together along with the rest of us?
Well, I think there's two parts to this, right? First, disgusted, right, at the alleged actions here, but also disgusted at Hockey Canada as well as the CHL, because again, what kind of ticks me off more here, Noah, is the non-disclosure part was part of this agreement and a settlement, right? So this, when we talk about proving things in court, when you sign a settlement, you're basically saying, I'm going to pay money to drop this. And more so on top of that, the non-disclosure agreement that she signs, whoever the victim was, and again, all thoughts are with her as she's dealing with this, basically saying you can't ever talk about this ever, or else whatever damage you receive, she'd have to pay back. So what pisses me off, and I have to use that phrase, I think very pointed here, is that this is yet another instance in where something comes out in the public about these things, which unfortunately are becoming more commonly reported, which is a good thing, because does that mean that these things are more frequent, or are they just coming to light more often? Either way, too many times, right, Noah? So this is, and just from what it's being Rick Westhead does a phenomenal job with TSN in terms of his reporting, the details, and unfortunately, he's kind of become sort of the ringleader in terms of these types of stories. But just incredible details here. Again, the fact that Hockey Canada, the CHL, is essentially trying to shut this down from really going further than that is, to me, the most despicable part about this. When we need to have an open conversation about this, yes, there's a lot of information here that is made public. But again, as far as holding specific people accountable, as far as I see nothing in here in terms of what the CHL has there been any sort of accountability for them, or with Hockey Canada. So there's a lot of stuff that's missing here. So to me, what stinks about this is, again, in this particular instance, there's no change that's happening. It's just, yes, this happened. We settled it. Here's your money. Sign this non-disclosure agreement, and we're just going to wash our hands and move on. And that's the absolute wrong message to send.
Yeah, well, I think that you go back to what our role is as fans of the game, and the fans of the game, right, similar to the Kyle Beach incident, I don't want to say have a duty, but in a sense, there's no other way to put it, where we can't let this drop, And I think with the Kyle Beach piece, there was where it was kind of like, is this real? Is this a sort of thing? And then as the story evolved over the summer, it was like, oh yes, this is definitely real. And we need to be behind this as fans of the game and make sure that this obviously gets addressed. And you kind of talked about it too. Now the other piece too, we don't know if the plaintiff, if she was essentially saying, you know what, I want to have this settled and I want my privacy, that could be another piece of this too. It could be where she wanted the non-disclosure agreement a little bit too, and just wanted to kind of move on with her life too. We're not sure. Obviously, that's part of the non-disclosure agreement. We're never going to know those things, I don't think, at least as of now. One of the other allegations, to kind of take you through what she was going through, also alleging that the John Doe defendants pressured her to not report the players to police and to not cooperate with a criminal investigation after it was initiated, which is very shameful. And she has suffered mental anguish, humiliation, degradation, shame, and low self-esteem. Has also impaired her ability to complete her education, earn an income, and establish relationships of intimacy, suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, nightmares, depression, and suicidal ideation, undergoing medical treatment and psychological counseling, and will continue to require the same indefinitely throughout her lifetime. I mean, that's a damning thing to put somebody through. And like you mentioned, I think disgusted is putting it lightly. I think that,
Yes.
of course, the Steve Dangle podcast, who was on top of this, used the word grotesque. And I think that that's a very apt description of what has gone on here. So like we talked about, Hockey Canada, who the lawsuit alleged that they ignored or failed to reasonably address institutionalized and systemic abuse, having knowledge that over the last number of years, its players were subjected to sexual assault and also encouraged to sexually assault others. They released their statement that didn't clarify whether it was just players on that team or just players, in the CHL, along with some players on that team. So that could mean one player that was on that team and 7 that were not, but also in the CHL. Could mean 7 and 1. We don't know. But then the next day, the NHL statement did read, 2 days ago, the National Hockey League was advised of a lawsuit involving sexual allegations filed against 8 unnamed members of the 2018 Canadian World Junior Hockey Team. We were subsequently provided with a statement of claim containing allegations of behavior that is both abhorrent and reprehensible. We will endeavor to determine the underlying facts, and to the extent this may involve players who are now in the NHL, we will determine what action, if any, would be appropriate. We have no further comment at this time. So that release talked specifically about 8 unnamed members that were on that team. Like we talked about, it doesn't seem that the...
Yeah, here's the problem with that. With a non-disclosure agreement, the NHL is never going to know.
Yeah.
So pardon my friends, but the NHL is BSing everybody right now. It's a BS statement.
And it's interesting. Well, I don't know if it's a BS statement. What do you want the NHL to do? What do you want the NHL to do? They can't do anything. And
that's the thing.
Here's the thing. If there's more information that comes out about this, I don't know where it's going to end up, because as we talked about last summer, with the story for Kyle Beach and Rick Westhead, it evolved slowly over the summer, and it really was the fans that kind of pushed back at the Chicago Blackhawks during this. This is a different story when we talk about this. I think, if anything, where we might see information, and the Steve Dangle podcast references as well, you have, if you take out the college guys, I think there was 3 college guys. It was Cale Makar and 2 other guys. Someone mentioned that Cale Makar was definitely not involved in this, and I think that was the big one because he's probably the biggest name out of this group. Other than that, I don't know. But that brings the total down from 22 guys in this team to about 18 or 19 guys that potentially are in this pool, and you're pulling 8 players from that. If you're the extra, 8, 9, 10 players that were not involved in this, would you not want to scream it from the rooftops that I had absolutely nothing to do with this? And I think, if anything, that might be where we get our information from is, if you have 1 player or 2 players that were not involved in this, who are telling some sort of reporter or telling somebody, or they wanted expressed in whatever way that they were not even remotely a part of this, you start to see that number start to dwindle down as part of, and that might be where we start to get the information, is that you have players that legitimately weren't a part of this, that are trying to clear their name. And Nick, that list only gets down to 8. And then either somebody's lying, or you've got 8 players who are responsible for this, because that's my thought is how else are you going to find out this information unless somebody is like, yeah, I know nothing about this. I was not a part of this.
Right. And here's how it's going to go. This is when you talk about the problem with hockey culture, right? It's, every man for the teammate, and you're always taking up for your buddies. I don't believe, as much as I respect and admire and would hope that we would get something like that. The problem is the other players who are not a part of it don't want to be that guy either, which means they don't want to be the ones that essentially are not guilty by non-association. It's almost the flip of it, right? Where we say, this wasn't, I don't think you're going to see that. Because at the end of the day, they know that that's how this dwindles down. And again, with a settlement, this is now out of the legal system's hands. This is done. What does, even if it was questioned, right, with an NDA, now mind you, NDAs usually signed on both sides, right? There's no way to prove it. There's no way to fundamentally prove it. So it is a dead end, one. And that's why my comment toward the NHL statement was as pointed as it was, because again, they talk about, as you read, that, we'll determine appropriate actions, but that would also mean that they would have to get a hold of some of that and then hold specific players accountable.
Yeah.
Which
would blow
up
but to be fair, the appropriate action for the NHL, in terms of the legal sense, is doing nothing because they can't do anything.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
I think the fear, and we've kind of talked about this. I think fans are kind of worried. Obviously, if you have a player that you like that was on that team, worried to obviously buy jerseys or other things that represents that team in any way, shape, or form, or those players. But I believe there's a couple of Chicago Blackhawks that are on that team too. And you talk about some of these organizations too, that they've already got so many of these things and so much turmoil going on that they don't want any of that added publicity that's related to those players. I don't know. And I don't know because hockey fans, like we talked about, can't let this die. But what can hockey fans do to kind of force the issue a little bit here? I guess my question that I would posit to you then, because you talked about how players, we still haven't hit that point where hockey players are willing to out themselves. I'm not a snitch by any means, but I know that if I was a player on that team and something, this is not to say there are, larger and lesser amounts of sexual assault, but like the depictions that were talked about in this, these are like you are, not only are you complicit in the act, you are willingly jumping headfirst into those actions. If you're one of the 8 John Does that are listening to this report here, and I would not want to be associated with any part of that. I don't give a shit who was on my team. I don't care. I would not want to be a part of that. And my question is, if you don't believe that that is the route that any details of this might come out, what is the next step for, like you mentioned, the National Hockey League or this story? How would you see, is there any way that this could develop further, or are we kind of stuck at a dead end crossroads?
So here's what the leagues, and I say leagues plural, right? And here's the other thing we got to be careful of. When we say, we have to make sure we're seeing the word alleged here, because again, this never made it out of court. This was never proven. This was a lawsuit that essentially was stopped in its tracks. It was settled. So we don't know that all these things that we are being reported are true to its exact form. I'm certainly not denying that they happened. I want to make sure I'm very clear on that. In fact, I believe the lawsuit and its details. However, we can't technically say that they actually happened. They're never proven. But in this sense, again, if you're the NHL and you're looking for steps up, these are the leagues that have to make that first step. Because again, if the Kyle Beach story didn't prove us anything, right? And that is, there is a ripple effect, right? So the Kyle Beach story, so, he gets assaulted, and then all of a sudden he goes on to Miami University. There was a threat there, and then goes on to a high school in Michigan where he actually does make significant harm. So there needs to be some sort of, if the NHL wants to hit a home run with this, you develop some sort of anonymous tip line, or you do, it has to be some training, right? There has to be some cultural training that starts either at the CHL level, I would think, or the AJHL, the OJHL. You have to start it young. You really do. And then build from that. And that way, when they get to the NHL level, then it's already indoctrinated to these players. And at that point, it's just a refresher course. And I think it should be required at every single level, like just some sort of like sexual assault or harassment training. And you don't have to make it a day long, but make it an hour, make it a 2. But also there needs to be more consequences. There has to be more consequences to this. And I think there's not quite yet a zero tolerance policy, even though they say there isn't. Again, with this lawsuit and its settlement, we're never going to see any reprimandation for either of those leagues from this specific case. So you hope that there's some changes. But again, I think, as you mentioned with the Kyle Beach situation, I think the idea here is we'll settle it. We'll try to maybe sweep it under the rug and just let bygones be bygones, which is not the way it should be handled. But that to me is where you would make a first step.
Yeah, and I think that the other piece of this too, it kind of in reference to what you mentioned and with Kyle Beach and that sort of thing, if anything, I think one of the best actions the NHL could take, like you mentioned, is forming some sort of organization or committee that handles these things in general, or is kind of a representative for handling cases like this, or for players who feel like, they've been aggrieved in some way, shape, or form, or you have somebody who feels they've been aggrieved by someone who is in the National Hockey League, the AHL, the ECHL, playing in those professional North American leagues or even European leagues, wherever you want to handle it, and kind of having that substantial organization, maybe headed by guys like Kyle Beach that understand the process and are representing a change in the game that takes away from the old school mentality of protecting the boys, essentially, and knowing that there are some actions that they're not admissible under any circumstances, regardless of if you're a hockey player or not. This goes way beyond the game of hockey, but the game of hockey has to come back into the public sector and identify themselves as an advocate for change. Like we talked about, this starts at the youth level. This starts at the junior level. This starts at the college level. The professional level is where we see the most intricacies as far as the cases, but that's not where all of this starts. And oftentimes, a lot of these victims happen in those younger ranks a long time before some of these things, and they get buried because
they never get reported. Correct.
Yeah, they're never a part of this. So, it like you mentioned, it pisses me off too. It's ridiculous that anybody would think to do this, much less players that are supposed to identify that are future stars or current all-stars in the game of hockey in the National Hockey League. I mean, that's a damning indictment on some of these players should they have been involved.
And if you want to hit a home run, you know what sports should do? And when I say sports, how about the big four, the NHL, the NFL, the NBA, and Major League Baseball? You form an independent committee, whether it's attorneys or something like that, and maybe it's an anonymous tip line for victims. Maybe it's an anonymous tip line for teammates, right? And because you can't be a part of any player association because, again, they're advocates for the player. So they're already in a conflict of interest there, right? Players, agents, same thing. The league is going to do what the leagues are going to do, which is going to try to protect their image and protect their likeness, right? So maybe that's what it needs to be. Maybe it's just to be like some sort of, conglomerate where, it's an organization that can essentially act on behalf of all four of the major sports and kind of be an independent body. I think if something like that was created, Noah, can you imagine how powerful that would be if, and again, they don't necessarily have to work in the public eye unless they had to. But let's just say that they get a call, they do the investigations, they would have to have agreements with every league that if they get a formal statement or enough to investigate, that they have full reins to interview people, whether it's people that are directly involved, indirectly involved, that could have been witnesses, and then whether it's make recommendations to, I shouldn't say recommendations, but also work hand in hand with maybe a local law enforcement that's in that jurisdiction. So that way these people are held accountable. Or I know that I hate to say it the other side, but if it is, just I hate to say a false claim, but because they're very, very low, but then you can go that route as well. Right. So,
I like that idea, as we kind of wrap up this topic here, what puts a chill down my spine? The fact that if you created a committee like that, think about how busy they would be. You know what I mean? Think about how busy they would be.
Part. But here's the thing. Here's the positive thing about that. If, let's just say this committee does form, and let's say it is busy, and now we talked about the conversation, not letting it slip, right? Now you can't let it slip because it's independent.
Yeah,
it's its own entity. And I think just the threat, right? Again, the death, we're going to go off topic just a little bit, but the death penalty and stuff, like no one wants to, it's, okay, you can murder, I'll kill you. That's not arm for arm. That's not how this works, right? But it's the threat of something that is supposed to be a preventative measure, right?
Yeah, it keeps things in check. Yeah.
Right. I think even just having that committee there and seeing some of the work that they would do, again, all things working that it would envision them to do, I think would have a dramatic impact on you, at least you would hope, on some of these things, because they know that it's not going to get under the rug. It's going to get found out, and you're going to be held accountable, whether it's a player, a front office person, a team, an organization, somebody, and it's not going to be getting away with. And I think that's the important thing is you can't have the leagues and essentially associations handle this by themselves, because it's just going to be swept under the rug way too much. It's got to be an independent committee that works in tandem with local law enforcement. So that way these things are properly investigated, and people that are found guilty of these, make sure I say that, are held accountable to the way that they should be.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Not a fun story to talk about, but something that definitely needs to be addressed here on the Huskies Warming House podcast. We'll keep you up to date on anything and any developments that we hear related to this story. You mentioned the National Hockey League and the governing body. Well, the NHL playoffs are in full swing. Round 2 just finished up about 10 minutes ago. So we're going to recap round number 2 and preview the conference finals for the Western and Eastern Conference. Welcome into the Extra Ice session. Nick Maxon is joining myself, Noah Grant, here for episode number 113. And just like 2 weeks ago, the timing couldn't be better. Plane rides notwithstanding there, Mr. Maxon. Round 2 has been completed, and round 3 is ready to get started. What would be tomorrow for us, but what should be today or later for those listening when the show comes out Tuesday morning. Let's start in the Eastern Conference. This one just wrapping up tonight about 10 minutes ago. Carolina losing this series 4-3 to the New York Rangers, losing game 7 by a score of 6-2. They were down 4-0 at one point. Interestingly enough, the Hurricanes, Nick, scored only 3 goals in a game in this series only one time. That was a 3-1 victory in game 5 through all 7 games of the series. So the offense running a little bit dry, some goaltender soirees, if you will. But
how about not winning a game on the road? Yeah,
this New York Rangers team has all the makings of what we've seen from Stanley Cup contenders in years past, where they have that stingy, scrappy bulldog mentality where they're never out of the fight unless you make them. And so far, they've been pushed to 2 game 7s, and they've gotten the job done both times.
Yes, they have, and they're going to be tested. You talk about a team that is also can be scrappy, that can also have offense, and more so, both these teams are led by the goalie, by their goaltending. Again, Igor Shesterkin on one side, Andrei Vasilevsky on the other. Again, one team that's won back-to-back cups. The Rangers looking to hoist the cup for the first time since '93, I believe. If I was at '92 or '93,
94.
So either '94. So okay.
Yeah, Mark Messier, come on, man.
Yeah, I know, right? Option C. That's what I meant.
Yeah. So
great matchup.
Yeah, it should be good. We're definitely going to preview it in just a few moments here. Like you mentioned, their other opponent, the Tampa Bay Lightning, winning their series by a score of 4-0. Florida held to only 3 goals over the course of 4 games, outscored 13-3 in this series. Tampa Bay looked like a team that was, I don't want to say shaky in the first round, but they kind of did what good championship teams do, where they found a couple of bounces, a little bit of puck luck from the hockey gods. In the second round, they just said, we're here to actually play now. And what a second round it is. You wonder how the time off is going to affect Tampa Bay. Will it be great for them? As I believe game number 1 for this series is going to be on Wednesday. Or if it's going to favor a team that's just come off playing in the New York Rangers. We'll preview that in just a second. But Tampa Bay and Florida, what surprised you besides, the fact that Florida didn't win a hockey game?
I think the biggest thing was Florida's offense just disappeared. That was a team that could essentially score at will. That's kind of what carried them through. And another part of it, and I think this also made us nervous throughout the season, is that team showed a lot of resilience in the regular season. But again, it was one of those trends that you didn't want to see kind of continue late in the season. And again, when you go into the playoffs, if you go to good teams, especially back-to-back cup champions, know how to shut things down. And again, power play was also terrible. Special teams were not great. It just seemed like Florida, for whatever reason, just didn't have it in the second round. And I mentioned this to you last week, just before taking off again, speaking of plane rides, that when Tampa went up 2-0, that series was over and it wasn't going to be close. I just had the feeling that Tampa was, like you mentioned, there to win this and win this quick. And I do think that once you get into later rounds, that rest is going to be huge, especially for a team like Tampa. And then again, the Rangers coming off a game 7, so they're going to be tired, a little bit winded. I think the rest is really going to benefit Tampa. Although I believe game 1 should be an MSG, if I recall. I think Tampa is the visiting team. If I saw that correctly. So, we'll have to see what game 1 brings. But sometimes when you let trainers rolling, you only need that one deck to want to keep playing hockey. So we'll see. It's a great matchup again, as we mentioned. Goaltending should be great. Special teams when these two squads are going to be a thing of beauty to watch. And then, of course, how about some great players on both sides? How about Adam Fox? Holy cow, 18 points on the blue line coming into Game 7. And then again, on the opposite side, holy cow. Well, I mean, what can you see much? Victor Hedman being a beast. Steven Stamkos finding form. Nikita Kucherov playing well. I wonder if Braden Point will be available for Tampa. That would be huge if he's able to return. So we'll have to see any update on him. But it's going to be a hell of an Eastern Conference final. I'm excited to watch it.
Yeah, Adam Fox with the opening goal in Game 7 against Carolina. That matchup, like you talked about, I believe starts on Wednesday. We'll talk about that series in just a few moments here. We're going to move to the Western Conference here, and a series that I predicted Colorado would win in 5. They were a goal away in overtime from doing so. They push it to 6 games. And it was Darren Helm scoring with 5 seconds left in that hockey game to bounce the St. Louis Blues 4-2 in that series. Nazem Kadri, his hat trick in Game 4, a little bit of beef with David Perron, which it's good that Perron missed with that flying elbow after coming out of the box when Kadri scored, because we could be talking about a very different thing there. But yeah, you know what? To be honest with you, I didn't think St. Louis, I'll stick by my guns. I didn't think they looked all that formidable in that second round. I was talking with a buddy who is a big Avs fan, and this Colorado team is just really good. I mean, there were some question marks heading into the playoffs with their stretch losing 5 of their last 6. But, once they got into playoff time, this Avs team, they've been a train that's definitely been flying down the tracks.
They have, and that's how they've been doing it too. Is they just are way too fast, front and back. And I mean, you talk about Cale Makar and the postseason he's having. He's essentially the defenseman duplicate of Nathan McKinnon. He's just unbelievable in his edge work. Great shot, great vision, and also plays pretty darn good defense also in the back end. And how about Nazem Kadri? Again, a controversial, maybe against Jordan Binnington, taking him out and with the injury. Although I think he was pushed in. I don't really think that was Kadri that made that. But again, public enemy number 1 for Blues fans, right? I do think, however, Noah, I still think you're right that Colorado may have won that series, but I do think it probably was stretched to 6, if not 7, had Jordan Binnington been able to continue on in that series. You could tell Ville Husso, was not ready for that type of spotlight just yet. And again, with St. Louis, especially after Binnington got injured, you could tell that they had one thing on their mind, and it wasn't winning hockey games. It was trying to essentially employ as much pain as possible. And so not a strategy that's going to win you our second round series, unfortunately, against a high flying Avs team that showed up and really took it to the St. Louis Blues. But it's going to be Colorado's they're a wagon for sure.
Yeah. I just Colorado for me I thought outplayed St. Louis in a lot of facets and just really controlled the better part of a lot of those hockey games and opportunistic when they had to be. The thing about Nazem Kadri too, and we've talked about it, he's had his playoff suspensions and that sort of thing, but honestly, I think he handled the situation perfectly. And people want to hate on him, for whatever reason. I don't think he did anything wrong, just scratching the crease as normal against Binnington. But beyond that, honestly, the St. Louis Blues, in some senses, did get beat by one guy, and that was Nazem Kadri, because they allowed him to get into their head. You look at the double penalty, and then Kadri scores right after both of those expire on the 5-on-3. David Perron, is frustrated with that sort of thing. Those are things that can't happen in playoff time. And, say what you want about the guy, but he had 87 points in the regular season. He's been a producer in the playoffs. Obviously, beyond that hat trick in game number 4, Kadri has been impressive in a lot of facets for the Avalanche. And, you can say what you want about his suspension history, but he's been really impressive to me as far as a lot of aspects related to his time with the Avalanche, which could be coming to an end after this season, because he's definitely due, I think, for a pay raise at number 91. Moving over to the Battle of Alberta, and it wasn't much of a battle, Nick. Unfortunately, for Calgary Flames fan, 4-1, the Edmonton Oilers somewhat handily took care of the Calgary Flames. Kind of interesting. Calgary only scoring 20 goals in this series, giving up 25. But how about this? Their lowest
9 of those in game 1.
Yeah, their lowest goal amount that they were able to hold the Oilers to was 4 goals in game 3. They gave up 6 in game 1, 5 in games 2, 4, and 5, and 4 in game number 3. I mean, that's not a recipe for success in any team in the playoffs. And Edmonton doing what they had to do. McDavid and Draisaitl each with 26 points for the first 2 rounds, which is equally impressive considering Draisaitl can hardly move half the time. And Evander Kane is on pace for 24 goals in the postseason. He has 12 now, which would eclipse his 22 that he had in the regular season in 43 games played. He's been a wagon. Before let's dissect the series, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Game 5, obviously a particular incident in Game number 5. But were you surprised more that Edmonton's offense was that potent and that dynamic, or were you surprised that Calgary had no offense and was unable to contain that top line to the Oilers?
I don't know if it was just a top line issue with Calgary. Again, Daryl Sutter, his MO is, take care of your own end. That's how he won 2 Stanley Cups with the LA Kings. Jacob Markstrom, your pick for the Vezina, did not look like a Vezina candidate goaltender in that series, although I don't think you can really fault him. I think he was hung out to dry quite a few times. And we probably saw a bit of a preview of that Game 1. It was at 9-6. Was the final score. Calgary getting Game 1. But again, they blew a 4-1 lead, at least a 3-goal lead at one point. Calgary did. So there was some troubling concerns there. But and again, McDavid, he's tough. He's tough.
Yeah, they were up 6-2. The Flames were, and it ended up being 6-6 before but they ended up winning 9-6. And like you talked about, you take away those 9 goals in Game number 1, they only scored 11 goals through the last 4 games of that series. So, and I think it was McDavid, Draisaitl, and Kane. They each average 8 points over the last 3 games of that series versus each of the players for the top line, Lindholm, Tkachuk, and Gaudreau for the Flames. I think each averaged 1 or 2 points through those final 3 games of the series. So you talk about a swing. The Flames, for whatever reason, just didn't have it. And, that's where I kind of wonder, even with Game 5, had Calgary escaped that, their underlying numbers, they were giving up too many odd man rushes when they were on the power play, even just did not look good. So let's talk about the incident from Game number 5. You have a player driving to the crease, a puck that's pretty much rolling into the net. And Nick, I think it's safe to say between you and I and everybody else here, that was not a kicking motion in the least. That was a player stopping it, just going towards the net. And the fact that they disallowed that goal when they've allowed so many others that have looked like Lionel Messi free kicks, this is an embarrassment for the NHL and the officiating crew.
100%. It's interesting too, because what I want to know is, again, in the rule book, it states distinct kicking motion. Yeah. Keyword distinct. What in the hell was distinct about that as far as a kicking motion? Yeah. That's what I want to know. So the only thing that I've watched it like everybody else, where you watch it like 12 different times, you see all the camera angles. Are they really trying to say that he distinctly put his foot up there to stop to push the puck in? Which, if that's the case, that's still not a kicking motion.
Yeah, it's just redirecting. And
I'm trying to figure out like where they made the call. And I can't figure it out.
And this is where we talk about officiating themes. And they've talked so much about, what makes a distinct kicking motion. Truly and honestly, I think that you have to lift your steel off the ice, and it has to obviously look like a kicking motion. I think, if you have a puck that's filtered towards the front of the net and your foot is on the ice and you're able to redirect your ankle in one direction or the other, because if you think about it, for those of you driving in your car, do this safely, or if you're sitting at home or whatever, try to rotate your ankle in one direction or the other very quickly. Like, it doesn't go very far in terms of trying to redirect a puck if it was in front of you. So, if you're able to keep, the heel of, your skate on the ice or something like that. I mean, even then, to call that a distinct kicking motion is a bit tumultuous at best. When I think of a kicking motion, I think of, like a soccer kick where you're legitimately kicking the puck, lifting your leg up and kicking.
You're propelling forward and accelerating the puck forward. That's the thing. Or should I say toward the net, maybe is the better way to phrase it. And again, I just don't know how that was integrated in that call. It befuddles me on how they reverse that call. But to your point, Noah, the bigger question is, let's say that they do escape it. Do you really think Calgary comes back in the series? I don't think they do.
That's what I'm saying. What's interesting? We talk about the rule changes so much. We had the 2 disallowed goals back to back in the Tampa series. Surprised it took 9.5 minutes to figure out that a puck hit the netting. Yikes. But the other thing, face-off win that was a hand pass, essentially. Should hand passes be allowed all over the ice, not in the defensive zone? Yes or no?
No.
You don't think so?
No.
I mean, I think they should. I think hockey's hard enough that why you can't, because here's the thing. When you make a hand pass, you can't close your hand on the puck anyway. So you have to flick it with your fingers or flick it with the top of your hand. I don't know. Like to me, obviously it was a hand pass. I'm not here to argue. It was the correct call on the ice. But like, you're telling me that play ruined the integrity of the game? I don't think so. You know what I mean? Like, interesting. Just an interesting
No,
thought.
I get it. And here's something else interesting too. Does a player like Trevor Zegras and what he can do, with putting the puck up on his blade and whatnot, if we start seeing that more of a trend, sorry, John Tortorella, maybe that does get looked at as far as hand passes, because if pucks are going to be in the air more and maybe you have to bat it down or what, maybe they do look at that in the future. But I think it's fine, the defensive zone, because it's not giving you an advantage kind of a thing. And again, pucks are moving so fast too, half the time. So I don't know. And maybe it's a safety issue. Maybe that's part of it, because you're whacking sticks. I don't know the full answer on that. I'm fine with the way it is now, but I could see it being looked at in the future, especially if we start seeing more Zorros and Michigan's being pulled off by more of these younger players coming up through the ranks.
Yeah, well, I mean, it certainly doesn't bother me now, I should say. Just kind of some food for thought. You know what's interesting, if I can interpret the rule correctly, theoretically, should you not close your hand on the puck, technically couldn't you keep your hand open and technically, I don't want to say dribble, but that's the only way I can think of, where you could technically just keep batting the puck up in the air and skate down the ice if no one took the puck away from you. You could technically do that, could you not? You know what I'm saying? Like, where you could have your hand open and just yeah, but you're not closing your hand on the puck.
No, I think that'd be a delay of game. I know, but I think you have to drop it. Doesn't the rule say you have to drop it?
I'm not sure. That's a good question.
I think it does.
More food for thought. If you know the answer, if you're watching on the YouTube page, definitely put it in our comments or tweet us at Warminghouse10. We'd love to know how stupid I really am.
Or you just found a loophole.
Yeah, I probably didn't. I'm probably just stupid. That's probably the legitimate answer. But nonetheless, what isn't stupid? Conference final time, Western and Eastern Conference. The Western Conference begins tomorrow night / today, if you're listening on Tuesday, at 7 p.m. Central Time is game number 1 between the Colorado Avalanche and Edmonton Oilers. Colorado will be the host team for games 1 and 2. Let's look back at the season series between these two teams. Only 2 matchups for both of these squads, and they both came in March. March 9th, Colorado a 2-1 victory in the shootout, and then March 22nd, Edmonton 6, Colorado 3. So a split in that series between the Oilers and the Avs. Only 2 meetings in the regular season. Nick, this is an interesting matchup because Edmonton has kind of come out of nowhere and been this productive team, albeit with the gaffes of Mike Smith having 0% save percentage from shots beyond the far blue line. It's been interesting how Edmonton's ride. They kind of remind me of the Rangers a little bit, where they've had a little bit of hiccups along the road, but they've been able to alleviate them in some way or some fashion. They're going to run into a Colorado team that is about as well-oiled of a machine as we've seen in the West. Who do you think comes out of this one? How many games will it be, and what are the key factors?
Oh boy, key factors. Colorado shoot from beyond the blue line. You're going to score. No, I'm kidding. Here's the thing. Colorado, first thing is it's their speed. You have to, and the other thing is for Colorado defensively, who do you match up against McDavid and Draisaitl? I think that's the big thing, is how do you try to, because you're never going to shut them down, but how can you maybe limit their scoring chances? That's the big thing for Colorado. And also, how about Darcy Kemper, right? If he can, if not steal you a game, I think that would be huge. And again, same thing for Edmonton. Mike Smith's going to be important in this matchup because, as we know, with Colorado, a lot of firepower. They're deep this year. Again, they've done something that I've been kind of calling for, is that they split up the big three of Landeskog, Rantanen, and McKinnon. So now they're a very good 1-2 punch. Nazem Kadri, holy cow, if he continues his ride, he's going to be tough. And then on the Edmonton side, again, just continue to create space and time for McDavid and Draisaitl. You need Mike Smith to be the goaltender that's gotten you here to the conference finals. And defensively, how do you slow down Colorado? I think the neutral zone is going to be really important for Edmonton, maybe forcing Colorado to do a dump and change and not allow them the puck possession, the carry-ins that Colorado likes. To me, that's going to be where this series one is going to be, in between the blue lines, to try to slow down Colorado. And for Edmonton, how can you get McDavid and Draisaitl and some of your other guys free to get in on the rush?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I feel like the home team is going to have the advantage here because that line change and line matchup for those first units is going to be imperative. Yeah, that. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting. I have the Colorado Avalanche in 6 games. I think the Avs, again, are just too well-oiled of a machine. They've probably got the better goaltending, like you mentioned, as long as Darcy Kemper stays on form, and their offensive potency. They've got so many weapons in their top 9 that I don't know that if you go pound for pound, I know Calgary was the same way and they got bounced, but I think that the offensive weapons are maybe a little bit deeper for Colorado than they were for Calgary. Edmonton might have a tougher time mitigating some of those chances. I think it's Colorado in 6.
I think Colorado takes it in 5.
Okay,
I'm gonna go 5.
You're turning into me now.
I know. I figure why not give it a stab, right? No, I know, right? No, but in all honesty, though, I think the team speed, especially in the back end of a call, is going to pose a lot of problems for Edmonton, just because it's posed problems to everybody else so far this season. I just don't know how Edmonton's going to slow them down. Again, you can make the argument on the side, how do you slow down McDavid and Draisaitl? But again, McDavid drives possession. I think Draisaitl can do that. I think he's more the recipient of the possession created by McDavid. That's why those two are so potent. And again, the depth of Edmonton just isn't as great there. And getting one thing we haven't talked about enough, Noah, is how good Colorado is in transition hockey. The way they can move from defense to offense, the way they get up the ice north and south. I don't know. I just feel like Edmonton's going to have a hell of a time slowing down. Not just that old machine, but one that runs basically in 6 gears, 6,000 RPM at all times.
Yeah, definitely. Begins Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Time. That one's going to be on TNT. Our Wednesday matchup is the Eastern Conference Game 1 at Madison Square Garden. That will also be at 7 o'clock Central Time on ESPN. And it's the matchup, the Rangers and the Lightning. And the season series in this one, 3 matchups between these two teams. And the New York Rangers swept the season series, 4-3 shootout win on December 31st, a 4-0 victory on January 2nd, and then a 2-1 win against the Tampa Bay Lightning on March 19th. Boy, these are two teams that just will not go away no matter how hard you try to push them to the brink. Tampa, much more impressive second round for them, obviously, against the Panthers. The time off will be the question mark, I think, in this series. The New York Rangers, can they be rested and healthy? And can they find a way to solve the Tampa Bay Lightning? Because no one for the past, let's just put it this way, the last 8 playoff series and now 10 playoff series have been able to solve the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. Can the Rangers and the Young Guns do it? Can we say this one might come down to goaltending?
Oh, you don't say? Yeah, no. Obviously, these teams are led by their goaltending and Shesterkin, as I mentioned before, and Vasilevsky. But again, and how about this? Great blue liners in Hedman and Fox, right? So a couple of guys have been Vezina Trophy, or not Vezina, Nick Norris Trophy finalists.
They've been okay.
Winners. They've been all right. And then you got some great, weapons up front again, Kucherov and Stamkos for Tampa. You also have Panarin. You've got Chris Kreider. You have Mika Zibanejad there for the Rangers. Hard to really find a true weakness for both of these squads. Yeah. So as I mentioned, it comes down to goaltending. But yes, I'm doing this. Tampa, to me, I just don't know. I think they're destined to three-peat. I do. So
yeah, I'm gonna go with the. That's my rap. I'm gonna go with the safe option here. I'm gonna go with the New York Rangers in 7 because that just seems like the recipe here. I think the Rangers get it done. Right. I really do. For whatever reason, this team has found ways to win hockey games in unique fashion. They've won low-scoring games. They've won high-scoring games. They've won games with a lot of power play goals. They've won games with a lot of penalty kills that weren't successful. They've won in all different fashions. And Tampa Bay has too. I think these are going to be 2 high-powered series, but I think this Eastern Conference matchup has a serious amount of intrigue. So I think the New York Rangers take this one in 7. I'm assuming Tampa Bay in 6, probably for 6. You. Yep. So it's going to be an interesting matchup. We're going to have to see who makes the Stanley Cup final. Should be exciting. I'll reiterate it one more time. Tomorrow night / today, Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Time on TNT, Colorado, Edmonton. All the games for the Western Conference, I believe, are going to be on TNT for the most part. And then for the Eastern Conference, is going to be those ESPN matchups starting at 7 o'clock Central on Wednesday. Rangers host Game 1. Colorado Avalanche host Game 1 on the Western Conference side. Nick, anything else to add for the show?
Well, Kevin Fiala hasn't been traded yet, so that's good.
Don't hold your breath. And we have not as well
Yes,
too.
I'm triggering the Wild fans. So
it doesn't take much, Nick. I think they do it by themselves. I think
honestly,
I think the Wild fans did what the Carolina Hurricanes did in Game 7, self-sabotage.
yeah.
Beyond that, I'm going to guess that we're going to have a regular Sunday release. We might even record on Saturday night this week for the Huskies Warming House podcast. And the week after, we're going to keep you posted because my work schedule is not advantageous for the status of the show. Let's just put it that way. So we'll keep everybody informed. That will do it for the Huskies Warming House podcast in episode number 113. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
Here, one-timer, come in, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores. Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it. He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real. Welcome to the NHL. A game winner.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.